This video is a quick look at Porsche's new electric Macan based on a slowish drive around a racetrack and a look at the spec sheets. So the first point about electrified Macans has to do with the petrol 911. Do you still want to see it? If the answer is yes, then you need to support the electrification of Macan for two reasons. The first one is the government NVES, or New Vehicle Efficiency Standard. That is a way to basically force people into zero emission or tailpipe emission vehicles as soon as possible by making everything else progressively more expensive. And that's a graph adding the amount of extra tax over time. It's going to be around $8,000 depending on the 911 variant in 2025, rising to over $16,000 in 2029. Now, the good news is that Porsche wouldn't necessarily have to add that tax on to the cost of 911 if they can sell enough electric vehicles, because for every electric vehicle you get in effect a credit to offset the debits. Now, I've explained all of this in much more detail in my NVES video. The second reason is that Macan is a real sales mainstay for Porsche, and here's the 1H sales figures. So the 911 18%, the 718 series 8%, Panamera 8%, Cayenne, always the heavy hitter, 35%, Macan at 25%, and then Taycan mere 8% to finish things off. So if Porsche can electrify the Macan, then that goes a long way towards meeting those targets. And Porsche also said we will continue to focus on a triad of drive systems: fully electric vehicles, efficient plug-in hybrids, and emotional combustion engines. And I didn't realise Porsche was going to combust emotions, or maybe he meant that the combustion engine is an emotional experience, which would imply that others are not, or maybe I'm just overthinking this press release. Okay, onto the Macan itself, and it is a little bit bigger, but not by very much, as you can see. So just a fraction, 58 mil, 1%. One quick point here is that when people worry about a larger vehicle, once they begin driving it, after a few days, it's really not a problem. The size of a vehicle has got very little to do with its actual manoeuvrability, particularly in this day and age of 360-degree cameras and sensors everywhere. Okay, then we come on to drag coefficient, and the drag coefficient on the petrol vehicle is 0.35, and it drops by 40% to 0.25 on the electric. Now, you don't need to worry too much about what drag coefficient actually is. The point being is that this vehicle slips through the air a lot more easily and uses less energy to cruise at speed because it is more aerodynamically efficient. And that's really important for battery vehicles because they have very poor energy density, heavy battery packs with not much energy in them, so they've got to be very efficient. Now, how have they done it? Well, I'm not an aerodynamicist, but I did spot a few things which I think contribute to it, and if you are an aerodynamicist, please comment. The first one is look at the rake here. That's those lines are at the same angle. That's a bit more sort of aerodynamically styled and streamlined at the bottom. Same thing for the windscreen. The windscreen at the front is angled a little bit further on the electric vehicle. The wheels make a surprisingly big difference to aerodynamics, and these I know are aerodynamically efficient. And even the wing mirrors, I think that this wing mirror is a bit more streamlined. So I suspect if you added up all of those actual changes, and again that's just speculation on my part, you'd end up with a lot more efficient vehicle. And even though it looks the same size, often people will say, oh, but how can it be more efficient? It's pretty much the same shape. Well, a lot of aerodynamics is in minor details like those. Okay, now some stats. Well, the petrol Macan is, as you'd expect, 20% lighter, but that's actually a pointless statistic, certainly at this sort of level. It wouldn't be in trucks and so forth. Why? Because what is lightness? Well, lightness is to do with handling, it's to do with performance, acceleration, and if you can achieve that even when the car is heavy, it doesn't matter if the car is heavier. That is my logic. So yes, it's lighter, but why does it matter? What's probably more interesting is it's got an 11% longer range, but then if we come over here, we find that the electric car is 36% more powerful, so it's a lot more powerful than the Macan. Petrol Macan is lighter. It's actually faster, 9% 0 to 100, 25% quicker 0 to 160 and 36% 80 to 120, and remember these are the base models here, so that's quite impressive stats. And then let's take a look at the hero models, the GTS versus the turbo. And yes, I know, Porsche turbo, we all know about that. 0 to 100, that's a quick car, 4.3 seconds, but the electric does it in 3.3. That is impressively fast. 0 to 160, the gap increases 28% quicker, and it's 31% quicker 0 to 200. And probably more important for real world driving is the 80 120, 31% quicker again. So the GTS is absolutely smashed by the turbo EV. Now, I didn't get a chance to do a full-on handling test, but I did enough, and I don't see anything wrong with the EV's handling whatsoever. Yes, it is heavier, but Porsche do know how to tune a vehicle. And remember, pretty much all of that weight is in the battery pack, which is ideally located. It's not only central between the front and rear wheels, but it's down very low as well. So the centre of gravity is extremely low, and I wouldn't be surprised if it had a lower centre of gravity than the GTS, and then that translates into all sorts of good handling benefits as well. So look, I mean, the thing handles, let's just be really clear about that. Now let's take a look at acceleration in the base model vehicle versus the turbo. In both cases, I've got my left foot on the brake, right foot planted to the floor, then I just let off the left foot off the brake and off we go. And now you can see just how much further ahead the turbo is than the base model. All right, now let's take a look at some other stats, Macan versus Macan Electric on the basics again. So the range here is 756 kilometres. Porsche don't provide a figure. I came up with that based on the 9.3 combined cycle, 75 litre fuel tank and a 50 kilometre reserve. Using the same kind of logic for the electric, it's 604 kilometres, which is quite a bit. Now, what's more important is charging, because with the electric vehicle you can just come into a servo, be on your way in 3 minutes, you've got another 756 kilometres of range, probably even more at freeway cruise consumption levels. You can't do that with an electric vehicle, you have to charge it. Now, all the manufacturers will throw out a headline figure of 20 minutes or something like that, and Porsche no exception. 10% to 80%, 21 minutes as a DC, in effect, a super fast charger. Now, the chances of you getting that are pretty small. It requires you to start at around 10%, only go to 80%, and you need to have that super fast charger. The battery needs to be conditioned in some way, that's sort of idealised, so probably unrealistic. You're probably more likely to get a 45-minute recharge off a 120, maybe around up a bit to an hour thereabouts, maybe a bit less if you're going from 20 to 80. Once you get above 80, the rate of charge drops off significantly. Now, the way that people tend to drive these interstate is that they'll go to 80% because that's your quick charge, and then they'll drive on to the next charger and then go to 80% and so forth. And if you can do that, if we look at the 80% range of a 50k reserve, that's 480 kilometres, and even if you round that down a bit to 400, well, Melbourne to Brisbane, that's one of your longer interstate trips, Perth excluded, that's 900 kilometres, so you could just double stop Melbourne to, sorry, not Sydney to Brisbane, you could double stop that and then you'd be fine. So I think for interstate trips or areas where there's plenty of chargers, this vehicle's got plenty of range and you don't need to worry about that. Charger anxiety is another issue. All right, so to summarise then, why do you buy the petrol or the electric? Well, the petrol is cheaper, at least until they're all sold, that is. Range and re-energise time. If you need your Macan to go from place to place, particularly in rural areas. You don't want to mess around with trying to find a charger and see if anyone is there and check it's not broken and just get on with your day. Then the petrol will still reign supreme. For that, you can do it with an electric, but you know, you're going to have to spend time managing your energy. The sound, if you like the sound of a petrol engine, you know, and personally, I think I would rather take the GTS on track than the turbo, despite the fact the turbo is quicker. And towing long range, EV towing is absolutely smashed when you put a trailer on. The range is much decreased. I've proven that in tests I've done, so you'd want the petrol for that. For everything else, I would buy the electric. It's faster and it's also more responsive, and you know, you've got that beautiful electric vehicle response at sort of 40 k's to 60 k's an hour, which petrols can't really match. And if you're driving around town or the burbs or something like that, that's where the fun comes into the car. Run cost, it's cheaper to run, and also it's cheaper to run in terms of time. Even if you don't care about servicing costs, you're going to have to take the vehicle to the dealer for less time, and it's going to have to be there for less time. So that's going to be a bonus. You get time back. And storage space, you've actually got more storage space in this car, and it's got a storage at the back and the front because it's got the front opening trunk. There's no bulky petrol engine to go in the front, so you've got more storage space, and that's got to be practical, so you can drive it forwards, backwards in, and still put your shopping in the front or the back. The emissions, I guess it's a badge of green, and for towing short range, I would definitely pick the electric, because the electric vehicles are just better at towing, with the one exception of range. So my summary is the electric Macan, for what I've seen in my friends and other people I've spoken to be a typical Macan use case, the electric Macan does everything better, with the exception of going on racetracks, towing long distance, and if you really need to move from place to place very quickly where there aren't many charges. So I hope you found this video useful. If you've got any questions, please use the comments, and thanks for watching.